Forget the American Super Bowl, Road to UFC is my Super Bowl. It's still crazy to me that so many MMA fans don't even know what Road to UFC is, and for me, it's one of the most exciting parts about following the sport as a whole. It's this gathering of a lot of the top prospects in Asia and throwing them into a year-long tournament to fight for a big prize in a UFC contract. Now, what I've done is gone ahead and made a roster for Season 3 of Road to UFC. Season 2 is basically wrapped up, and there are so many good choices to choose from, and some of these weight classes were so hard to cut down to just 8 fighters per weight class, while other weight classes, it was really hard to find and scout out 8 high-quality fighters that could fill out a tournament bracket. I'll walk through all of that with you in just a moment, but first, let's talk about some of the particulars of what I'm about to show you.
So understand that this is going to be a little bit different from just an overall Asian MMA prospects list. This will specifically be for fighters that could compete in Road to UFC Season 3. Understand that the timeline is set to be mid to late May in the Shanghai PI in China. With that, there's some requirements that were sent out by the UFC to fighters and managers that will eliminate a lot of fighters that you may expect to see on this list. Those requirements are, they must have at least 6 pro fights. They cannot be coming off of a loss. They have to be 18 to 30 years old, have a 55% finish rate, and a 70% win rate. So there's a lot of fighters out there that normally I would consider them for the list, but they're coming off of a loss, or they're just a little bit too old or too many decisions. There's also an issue with the time frame, right? So there's a lot of fighters that actually have fights scheduled in March, even into April, that I'm not totally sure would be able to make a turnaround by mid to late May. There's even a couple fighters on the list that I included that have fights scheduled through the end of February, and I'm just kind of banking on them winning those fights. So keep that in mind as well. So let's take a look at the flyweights.
So here is the flyweight roster. Since Jean Yushirie looked outstanding in Season 2, and the stoppage on his finals fight was a bit premature, I think he may be the easiest shoe-in for the whole 3rd season. It's a big commitment to fight 3 times in the last year and immediately commit to doing it again, so there's always the possibility that he'd decline, but if he joins, he'd be a big favorite right away. Takeru Uchida won a non-tournament bout in the first Road to UFC season, and since then he's gone 1-1. I wouldn't mind seeing if he can get a shot at a tournament spot this year to see if he can continue his 100% submission rate on his wins. And now I've got Angad Bisht and Clinton DeCruz. I really don't think there'll be many Indian fighters in Road to UFC this year, but these are the very best 2 that I could think of. Bisht is the MFN flyweight champion and is a superb grappler, and so is Clinton DeCruz. These 2 could actually fight each other next in Matrix Fight Night, and I think it's sometimes hard for MFN fighters to get out of their contracts to fight in Road UFC, so it's a bit iffy here. Badmitsiran Dorjiev would make the lone fighter out of Mongolia in this tournament, but he is one of the top prospects out of the country. He is actually the flyweight champion for American promotion CFFC. He does have a title defense in early March, but should he get by that, I'd love to see him in the tournament. Lee Jung-hyung got back in the win column at Road FC this last December, and his last opponent in Road to UFC, Mark Klimako, is also coming off a win in UAE Warriors, so let's give them another shot. Peter Daniso is our lone representative from Thailand and has gone 1-1 in Road to UFC non-tournament fights. He would bring a ton of excitement to the flyweight tournament. Let's look at the men's bantamweights. Of course, I've got Daramisi Jawupasi on here, a Road to UFC semifinalist from last year. Got Wang Xiaoshang on here. Wang may be an unfamiliar name to a lot of you, but Wang is the JCK bantamweight champion and trains out of the same gym as Zhang Weili, Black Tiger. He's a really good wrestler and has pulverized his last couple opponents, and I think now is his opportunity to take the next level up in competition. Got Shuya Kamikubo on here, another Road to UFC semifinalist from last year. His wife posted an interesting video asking him to join the 3rd season, so I really hope he will. We didn't get to see the best out of him last year in the semis for Season 2. A couple more Japanese fighters on the list, Tokitaka Nakanishi, Joji Kato, and Shoji Saito. Got Yusu Young on here, and it seems like he may have some unfinished business with Kim Min Woo in Black Combat, but if he doesn't, he should definitely be in the lineup. Yu is a BJJ black belt and has held belts both for Black Combat and Nysa FC. And then another Korean on the list, Young Ji-young, a Road FC veteran. Now moving on to the featherweights. I debated whether or not to put on Lee Kai-win on this list just because he does have a 12-6 record and he lost pretty quickly in the Road UFC finals last year. But I went ahead and included him just because he does have a lot more high-level experience than pretty much anyone on this list. And he's still young and has a lot to prove. A couple other UFC PI fighters, I put Shia Bin, Baargung Jela Isa, and Ahajang Alinuar on the list. Out of Indonesia, not a lot of fighters on my total roster from Indonesia this year, but I did go ahead and put Firman Siak on here, who is an undefeated One Pride lightweight champion. He recently took out one of my other top prospects in Yudi Kayati, the former champion. So maybe it's still a little bit too early for him, but let's go ahead and give him a shot. He's one of my top Indonesian prospects. Out of South Korea, I put Kim Min Woo on here at featherweight rather than bantamweight, which is what he attempted in the first season of Road to UFC. And perhaps, like I said, he may have some unfinished business with Yu Soo Young, but if he doesn't, he remains one of my very top Korean prospects. I've also got Song Young Jae on here, an AFC featherweight champion who is 6-0-1 with all finishes. All right, now let's take a look at the lightweights. I know everyone's going to be asking me about Shin Haraguchi. Why is he not on this list? I simply felt that even though he would definitely be a good addition to Season 3, just kind of what I saw out of his fight at the finals, it seems like there are some areas of his striking and just mixing in more techniques to his wrestling. I feel like it would do him a lot of good to sit this year out, get some fights on the international scene. Haraguchi's just 25 years old, so he's got a lot of time. Let's not rush things, but if he's in Season 3, I wouldn't be mad. But who I do have, I've got Aili Mulata Bieka from China. He's the new JCK lightweight champion, and he was supposed to be in Road to UFC in the past. He seems like a shoo-in to me. Aziz Kadirov, a Tajik who trains out of China Top Team. Another great addition, trains out of the UFC PI. Danny Dafa out of Indonesia. For Japan, I've got Yuji Yannick Foviga, 6-1, 24-year-old. This is a guy that's been getting a lot of hype for his knockouts, and he would be a ton of fun to have in Season 3. I've also got Shunta Nomura out of South Korea, a really strong list here. I've got Park Sewon, an 8-0, 21-year-old who is a Road FC champion. Yoon Chong Min is a name you may recognize from One Championship, and as far as I know, he is out of his One Championship contract and looking to do something different, so I think this would be a great entrance into Road UFC for him. And then rounding out the list, I've got Road UFC semifinalists from last year, Kim Song-wook, who is a really popular fighter, showed a lot of great things in his last season. I would love to see him come back. He's the new AFC welterweight champion, and let's get him back in Season 3 before he ages out. Now let's take a look at these strawweights. Now I had a really hard time finding 8 fighters to fill out this roster because a lot of the fighters you might be thinking of that should be here, like a Seika Ozawa or a Dong Huaxiang, a lot of those fighters are committed in contracts to other promotions, so it may be hard to pull them away for Road to UFC. Also, a lot of these fighters just don't meet the requirements for Road to UFC. They don't have enough fights, high quality wins, too many decisions, too old, etc. But I think the UFC may be willing to fudge a little bit of the rules so that they can fill out the roster with high quality fighters. I've got Feng Xiaosan on here, who is a 22-year-old Chinese fighter who's on a 6-fight win streak. I've had my eye on her for a long time. Perfect addition to the roster. Shi Ming, a fighter from the UFC PI system. Longtime veteran of Chinese MMA, really solid wrestler. Arisa Matsuda, maybe too few fights, but she is the deep champion, coming off a really solid win over Machi Fukuda. Would love to see her in this tournament. Karen Date is super young and a former Pancrase champion. Sonam Zumba out of India, a Matrix Fight Night veteran. She may need to get a couple more quality wins before she's considered, but I wouldn't mind seeing her. Dwi Ani Retno Wulan is the One Pride strawweight champion. All of her fights are decisions, but let's get an Indonesian in here on this women's tournament. From South Korea, I've got Park Soo-woo, who is one of the most experienced fighters out of this whole women's strawweight tournament. I think she could almost just sign with the UFC, but I wouldn't mind seeing here just to get some good experience in there. And then this may be a long shot, but I'd love to see Truk win in the strawweight tournament. She is 2-0 and a champion at Lion Championship, which is the top Vietnamese MMA promotion. Everything I've seen from her, from all of her amateur amateur fights and pro fights. Her grappling is really sharp, has a lot of good composure. I think she would make a really good addition to this tournament, even if just for the experience and the exposure. Now I've got 4 non-tournament fights for you. These are for the women's flyweight division and men's welterweight divisions, which I really tried to scout out an 8-person bracket, but just couldn't spot enough available talent. Got Tailaka Nuaraji fighting Ko Suk-hyun of South Korea. Tailaka does have a fight scheduled for February 24th in Niza, but should he win that, he should automatically, I feel, get a shot in Road to UFC. I'm putting him against another really good Korean prospect in Ko, and he is the AFC middleweight champion. For women's flyweight, everyone wants to see Wang Song compete, so I would say put her in a non-tournament fight against Hong Guangmei. I don't know if this fight would actually come together since the two of them have trained together a lot at the UFC PI, but there's really just not a lot of options. Some of these fighters have competed both at flyweight and bantamweight, so I think it would be a big ask to cut down to flyweight 3 times in 1 year. I've also got Dana White's Contender Series alum Yan Chi-Hui fighting Rin Nakai, who is a UFC veteran. These two, I feel, are on a similar level, 1 fight away from the UFC, and both have been starved of top quality opponents for the last few years. Now, just real briefly, I want to touch on a couple names that I could see being perhaps alternates or fighters that maybe you expected to be on this list, but for whatever reason don't meet the requirements, or I think maybe just not quite ready for Road to UFC. See, on this flyweight roster, I've got Feng Tian Hao. I believe he's going to be fighting with WLF next. A couple Koreans on that flyweight roster that are scheduled to compete in the Gladiator flyweight tournament. Here at featherweight, a lot of good names here. Kim Tae-kyun, I think, is too good for this Road to UFC tournament, and I think that he should fight in the UFC next. Shin Haraguchi, I already went into that. I'd love to see him fight a little bit on the international MMA scene first. And then some of these strawweights, obviously some exceptional fighters here. Dong Hua Xiong, probably going to be fighting with WLF next. Seika Izawa, she should either fight at the top level in the UFC or somewhere else. Also, she has a fight coming up on March 24th against Park Seo-yoon.
That is my full roster for Road to UFC Season 3. Keep in mind all the requirements that I told about you earlier, but if there is anyone that you feel like I really should have included in this list, feel free to let me know. So check out some of these other videos if you've got the time, and we'll see you later.